The phone never rang. Not once. Not for weeks. Friends who had known him for decades began to whisper into the night, "Something's wrong." But no one knew exactly what. Not until the cameras started rolling. Not until the world finally saw the man who once captivated millions standing alone on a quiet street at dawn, eyes distant, as if he were searching for someone he had lost long ago. This is the story of Richard Gere at 76. A journey that begins in Hollywood's golden afterglow and leads into a chapter most fans never saw coming. You might think you know his movies, the charm, the swagger, the unmistakable smile, but what happened to Richard Gere after the spotlight dimmed? And more importantly, what did he lose along the way? In the early scenes of his life, Richard wasn't meant to be a movie star. He grew up in a town where ambition was measured in degrees and hometown pride. But he carried something else, a restlessness, a yearning to be more than ordinary. It was this fire that led him to New York City in the 1970s, where he walked onto Broadway stages with nothing but grit and a voice that could rise above doubt. By the time American Gigolo premiered, the world had memorized him. A natural elegance, a seductive presence. It was as if the camera fell in love with him. Every role etched deeper into Hollywood history, until one day, it didn't. Some say the first crack appeared not on set, but at home. His relationships, once buoyed by youthful optimism, began to carry the weight of expectation. The laughter that once filled his living room faded into silences. Not dramatic silences, but the kind that creep in slowly, unnoticed until they take over. He kept working, of course. Pretty Woman, Chicago, a career that could have continued unchallenged forever. But deep inside, something in him began to shift. The charm that once felt effortless became heavier with each passing year, like a smile holding back 1,000 unspoken thoughts. What no one saw behind the scenes, what the public never knew, was a quiet battle. A battle not with fame, but with identity. Who was Richard Gere when the applause dimmed? When the scripts stopped pouring in like waters? When the spotlight dulled and in came the twist? Not a sudden tragedy with blinding flashes, but a slow unraveling of certainty. In 2023, fans noticed something unusual. A video surfaced, shaky, informal, of Richard walking through a park at sunset. Not on a red carpet. Not glancing into a film premiere's camera lights. Just walking. His face, once so familiar on billboards and magazine covers, looked tired. Vulnerable. Comments poured in. Is he okay? What's going on? But the real story wasn't in the millions of eyes watching. It was in the silence of those closest to him. For decades, Richard had been known for two things: his craft and his compassion. He spoke often about meditation, about stillness. He talked about searching for truth. But somewhere between Oscars and activism, something shifted, not outwardly dramatic, but deeply internal. Behind closed doors, friends whispered about sleepless nights. There were days he didn't answer calls. Weeks where the script pages lay untouched on his desk. For a man whose life was once mapped in movie roles, something had grown unmapped inside him. It was during this period that an old friend, someone who had known him since his earliest New York days, shared a memory no one ever expected to hear publicly. A memory of Richard sitting on a rooftop at dawn, his gaze fixed on the city lights. He didn't talk. He just watched, and then whispered, "I'm afraid I've lost the story." Lost the story. This wasn't a line from a movie. It was a confession. But what does that mean for someone who built his life around telling stories? It means that for the first time, Richard Gere faced the most terrifying screenplay of all. The one with no script pages, no director's cues, no audience applause. And through it all, something surprising began to happen. Stories started emerging from people who once worked with him, crew members, co-stars, even strangers. They told tales not of a fading star, but of a man who listened. A production assistant recalled a moment. On the set of Chicago, Richard noticed a sound technician struggling with doubt. Without hesitation, he walked over, kneeled down, and said something so soft, no one else heard it, but the technician did. And it changed him. "You've got a place here," he said. "Your voice matters." Another memory came from an extra, someone whose only scene was a single line in a crowd. They remembered how Richard invited them to dinner after the shoot, asked about their dreams, their fears, their why. As if being in a film wasn't enough, he genuinely cared about who they were outside it. When he wasn't acting, he was watching the world with eyes that didn't miss much. A bird landing on a sidewalk, crack, a stranger quietly comforting. Another, the way sunlight painted the corners of a coffee shop at 8:03 a.m., these were the scenes that mattered to him most. But the inner battle remained. For years, Richard had been a seeker. He spoke of Buddhism, of compassion, of mercy. But compassion for others is a flame, and compassion for self is a mirror. Sometimes that mirror reveals reflections we aren't ready for. By 2024, something profound began to surface in his work. Less about the polished roles, less about the leading man, more about real stories, raw, vulnerable, human. People noticed. Critics began to speak of a renaissance, not in blockbuster films, but in voices that carried depth and experience. In a world obsessed with looking young and perfect, Richard's authenticity stood out like a solitary lighthouse on a foggy night. And then, the moment that shifted everything, a documentary filmmaker reached out. Someone who didn't want the glamour, someone who didn't care about box office numbers, someone who wanted to follow him through the quiet parts of life. The moments where the camera isn't supposed to be. Richard said yes. The world expected Hollywood glamour. Instead, the cameras followed him to a small seaside town where he walked along empty shores at dawn, one hand in his coat pocket, the other tracing patterns in the sand. This was not a performance. This was life. Unfiltered. At one point in the film, we see him sit on a weathered bench, staring at the horizon without speaking. Hours pass, wind rushes, seagulls cry, and then softly, he speaks. We think we are defined by what we achieve, but maybe it's what we survive. The words don't seek applause. They land like steady raindrops on a quiet afternoon, and in their simplicity is a truth that resonates. For years, fans had seen Richard as an icon, untouchable, larger than life. But in that moment, he was simply human. Fragile, imperfect, real. There's a scene in the documentary where he visits an old friend, someone whose name we never hear. They sit across from each other at a weathered kitchen table. No cameras, no scripts, just two souls sharing silent space. The friend asks him, "What are you really searching for?" Richard pauses, and then he says something that catches even the filmmaker off guard. "I'm trying to find what I lost while I was busy being found." Pause. What does it mean to lose yourself while the world watches, to give so much of your life to stories that belong to others? To be adored for roles that aren't your real story? In that moment, something fragile breaks, not dramatically, not loudly, but gently. Like a deep breath exhaled after years of holding it in. And we realize this isn't just Richard Gere's story. It's something that belongs to all of us. How many of us have chased success while ignoring the quiet voice inside? How many of us have stood in front of applause only to find an emptiness we didn't expect? How many of us have forgotten who we are when no one is watching? The documentary doesn't wrap things up neatly. It doesn't give us a perfect ending. Instead, it leaves us with questions, the kind that echo long after the credits roll. There's a shot of Richard walking into the waves, the surf rising around his ankles. He doesn't run from the cold. He steps into it. And for a moment, he stands there unmoving, as if confronting something within. Then he turns, looks back at the camera, and smiles. Not the Hollywood smile that once lit up marquees, but something softer. A smile that acknowledges pain, growth, regret, healing, all at once. And then he walks on. Not towards something we can see. Not into a future we can predict. But forward all the same. What happened to Richard Gere at 76 isn't a tragedy. It's a truth, a reminder that life doesn't follow scripts. That the most meaningful roles we play are the ones we don't rehearse. That every story, even those that don't end in applause, can still offer grace. So the question remains, not just for him, but for every one of us watching. What parts of your story are you still searching for? What have you lost? Well, you were busy being found. What are you willing to face when no one else is looking? Perhaps the greatest takeaway isn't what happened to Richard Gere at 76, but what he invites all of us to discover within ourselves. And that is a story worth staying for.